But yeah, so it's always a good strategy when you're in a moment of stress, start making dua for other people like crazy. And that sometimes benefits you more than even making dua for yourself.
We'll definitely start doing that.
But with that, I'm going to jump right into it. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalam ala rasulillahi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa ahlul uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli rabbi zidni ilma. We begin in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we send peace and blessings upon our final messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Inshallah, today we are, of course, continuing our study of the life of Musa alayhi salam as it's found in the Quran. And we're going to pick up exactly where we left off last week. We were sharing, and we had switched over to talking about, instead of Surah Al-Qasas, talking about Surah Al-Taha, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala captures the conversation that Musa alayhi salam has with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And last week we ended off with this beautiful kind of, again, it's this idea of he's in front of the burning bush and he's having this conversation. Allah says, "Ya Musa" to him. This might have been the first time in 10 years that he was called by the name of Musa. So it's already bringing back his entire history. And we could make the argument that he was trying to forget it. This could be a traumatic past that he's thinking about, a country he used to live in, a country he's tried to forget. He's now started a new life, and he still feels a little bit guilty. And we're going to see that in today's conversation that we have about Musa alayhi salam. But he still has some guilt associated with what happened in Egypt. He knows his family may be still in a pretty terrible position, and he ran away. So I'm sure there's a lot of turmoil that Musa alayhi salam is feeling about being called Musa again. And yesterday we also had that right after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives Musa alayhi salam this grand mission in which it's Allah introduces Allah's self. Allah says to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to establish prayer, to talk about the day of judgment, and to let people know that they will actually be affected by the consequences of their actions, that every soul may be rewarded according to its effort. And don't let people take you away from that truth, or else it'll lead to fartardal. That they will be completely kind of worthless. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then added, وَمَا تِلْكَ بِيَمِينِكَ يَا مُوسَى. And what's in your right hand, Musa? Again, I don't like making analogies of parent to child, but I think it's an accurate analogy in this case, or at least reflects a little bit of the dynamic that's going on here. This sounds like a parent who is speaking to their child and really giving them like a very, very big lesson. And the child is like fidgeting with I have a coffee cup in my hand, but like maybe it's like fiddling with a toy. And then, what's in your hand? Yeah, Musa, what's in your hand? Oh, this, and this is how Musa alayhi salam responded. We got this last week. قَالَ هِيَ عَصَايَ. This is my stick. أَتَوَكَّلُ عَلَيْهَا. I lean on it. وَأَحُشُّ بِهَا عَلَى غَنَمِي. And I beat down, I lead my sheep with it. وَلِيَ فِيهَا مَآرِبُ أُخْرَى. That I make leaves fall down from trees so that my sheep can eat, and it's got a lot of other uses too. What is this? This is, again, Musa alayhi salam extending the conversation with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as much, because he's actually very much enjoying this. We can also imagine that Musa alayhi salam has been almost forgotten, or at least he might feel that way. He was a prince in Egypt getting all of this attention from people that he had to escape it, pretending to be someone else in the streets. And now he's probably in a situation where like no one really gives him the attention that he used to get. And now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving him this amazing attention. The Lord of the world, who already introduced Allah's self, is now giving him this attention. So he wants to extend this conversation as much as possible. And there's something beautiful about that. Last week we focused in and honed in. There's so many different perspectives that we can look at this conversation through. Last week we honed in on the idea of talk to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with whatever language you have. If it's to describe a stick, it's to describe a stick. If you're really passionate about art, talk to Allah in artistic language. If you're really passionate about family, talk to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala about your family. Whatever it is, talk with what you have. And Allah, and today what I want to focus on is actually how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responds to Musa alayhi salam. And also, there's two parts of today. there's two perspectives with how this conversation went. We have this one that's reserved in Surah Al-Taha, which is generally understood as how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes the interaction between Musa alayhi salam and Allah. And we're going to go back to Surah Al-Qasas and talk about the other account of what Musa alayhi salam responded to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with. So first we'll start off with the Surah Taha one, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قَالَ أَلْقِهَا يَا مُوسَى. Oh Musa, throw it down. فَأَلْقَاهَا فَإِذَا هِيَ حَيَّةٌ تَسْعَى. And he did, and suddenly in front of him was this lifelike snake, was this snake that was alive. And of course, this is talking about a miracle from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that one of the miracles given to Musa alayhi salam is that stick that he just described so fervently to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala used that in order to do something miraculous with it. And I think there's already a beautiful lesson here that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can use what you have in ways that you didn't even think possible. It's a stick, and Allah turned it into what? A miracle that an entire nation would be intrigued by. That's something amazing. And I think in our day-to-day lives, this is a huge lesson for us to have. Like when your mind is set forward and your mission is strong enough, something so simple. For some people, it could be their writing, right? They might not value their writing. Maybe they're a little bit creative, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could use your writing in a way that you didn't even think possible. Maybe for some people, it's their voice. Kind of nice. I don't know what I can do with it. Maybe it leads to someone's guidance or an entire community's guidance. Maybe it's your business. Maybe you can see all of the different kind of connections that can be made here. But I think it's a major lesson of the surah is, why would Musa alayhi salam first describe it? Because he was passionate about this. And I think something beautiful here is Musa alayhi salam I think the stick is a really beautiful thing to talk about, because it's a tool that a shepherd uses, right? To cause what? A stick can do what? It can, I guess you can lean on it, I guess you can hit things with it, but can it amaze? And I think the actual answer is yes, it can. It can be used for much more than that. One of the things we appreciate about being a shepherd is there's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that said that every prophet was indeed a shepherd at some point in their life. Because shepherds, they pick up these skill sets that make them super valuable, not just in herding sheep, but in literally being a caring presence. That patience that they have, that empathy that they have, that sense of not making sure that you recognize every animal has its own name and its own personality, all of that becomes useful in what? Becoming a community leader. And I think the same thing could be said about so many different skill sets that sometimes you find yourself of like, hey, I never chose to be, and insert whatever job you want. I never chose to be tech support at my school library. I never chose to be a waiter. I never chose to be insert whatever you want, whatever position Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put you in. Maybe your job was to actually get a stick. I have a coffee cup in my hand. I never chose to be a coffee server, whatever the case may be, right? But maybe there was a skill set for you to pick up in those moments that you're going to be using for what? Literally taking down people from oppression, even. Like Musa alayhi salam, saving an entire nation. And where was this training? On a couple of hills with a stick on dealing with sheep. Pretty interesting that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses what Musa alayhi salam had. So I'm going to continue. I'm not going to belabor that point too much because that was just something that popped in my head. That was a side point from today's main actual point. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then.
Someone's asking for the link for this in the group chat.
Oh, I'm going to go ahead and post it in the chat here. If you can share that in the group chat.
Okay.
I thought I had posted today. Didn't I? Did
No,
I?
you didn't.
Did I just?
You did.
I sent it.
Oh, oops. Okay, my apologies. Okay. Anyway, going back to this. Where was I? So yes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala works with what you have. And the training that you were getting was just that, and it can be used to amaze in ways that you never thought were what was possible. But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues, قَالَ خُذْهَا وَلَا تَخَفْ. Take it and don't have. سَنُعِيدُهَا سِيرَتَهَا الْأُولَى. We'll return it back to its former state. Again, this almost as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is showing Musa, oh, you thought you could do stuff with your stick? This is what you can really do with it. And now Musa is intimidated. This sometimes also happens when you are taught a new perspective, as people start entering in now, alhamdulillah. You are taught a completely new perspective of something you thought you knew everything about. You thought you developed some skills in that job. You thought you developed some skills in speaking. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exposes you to, this is the true potential of your speech. This is what you can actually accomplish with those skills. You suddenly get scared. I would make the argument that this is called imposter syndrome. That sometimes you realize the effect of your skill set and you get really scared by it. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, خُذْهَا وَلَا تَخَفْ. Take it, don't be afraid of it. سَنُعِيدُهَا سِيرَتَهَا الْأُولَى. We'll return it back to its former state. It'll go back to what you recognized it as. It is yours at the end of the day. You earned it. Weirdly enough, simply what's being talked about is pick up the stick. It'll turn from a serpent back to a stick. But what's also being talked about, just because you use it in a way that you're not familiar with, doesn't mean you've lost it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will sometimes bless you with impact that you could never have expected. And you start wondering, is it even mine anymore? Like, can I go back to my normal life again? You can. Don't be afraid. It's still yours. So, and then also it continues, وَضْمُمْ يَدَكَ إِلَى جَنَاحِكَ تخرج بيضاء من غير سوء آية أخرى. Put your hand under your armpit and it will come out super bright. And in one of them it says without disease. I don't know if that's the best translation. It won't be in any way deficient is probably a way I would put it. It's another sign. If the last one was a metaphor for the skills that Musa alayhi salam had accomplished, this one, in my opinion, and of course we do believe that these are miracles that were given to Musa alayhi salam, but I think the miracle also goes from a objective one and also a personal one. The first one is the skill sets that you have more use than you think they do. And the second one, what you actually look like. Musa alayhi salam, again, he's carrying the guilt of having left his people behind, carrying the guilt of killing a person, carrying a guilt of all of these other things. And what's his sign? You will be bright and a light that people can look at that has no tarnishing whatsoever. Because sometimes we fear what? I'm not a good enough messenger, right? Who am I? Who am I to speak about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Who am I to call people to this path? What can I do? And what's his miracle? You have skills that you never thought you knew. You have skills that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put in you, and you didn't even know what their true potential was to amaze. And the other is, even your own body, even yourself, it can be a shining example for people. Literally, his hand would turn white. His hand would turn without any issues, without any deformity. غَيْرِ سُوءٍ آيَةً أُخْرَى. That people would see it as a pure source of light, without any sense of deformity within it. Pretty cool. I'm gonna stop talking for a second. We only have 10 more minutes today, but that doesn't mean that I don't value your reflections, and because I think oftentimes you guys are way more profound than I'm able to think of reflecting on these ayat. So what do you guys think about what's been discussed so far?
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So back then people used to believe in witchcraft, and people still believe in witchcraft and stuff like that, but magic a lot. If something good happens, they blame it on magic, or if something bad happens, they blame it on magic, pretty much.
Yeah.
The whole entire I know we differentiated the fact that whatever happened to Musa alayhi salam's stick is a miracle from Allah, and whatever I'm kind of jumping ahead kind of, but whatever like the magicians did was straight up magic. How can you blame the people for, not even blame, how can the people be responsible for like, differentiating between those two? Because at the end of the day, if I saw a stick moving in front of me, I'd be like, this is straight up magic. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
How can you differentiate that?
I think one really clear-cut difference is first that prophets were sent with miracles that were appealing to their time. So that's one thing of the sensibilities of the time would be the language that's used. So that's one thing to be appreciated. At the time of Musa alayhi salam, this type of magic would be what really appealed to people. And the second part, and I think this is actually the more important part, is who gets empowered by the quote unquote miraculous thing that's occurring. Because oftentimes when people would do magic, it was a means of their own empowerment of, look, now you need to listen to me. Look, now you need to pay me. Look how great I am. Look, let's show off in front of the Pharaoh, because that's about to happen when we get to that point where the magicians are trying to compete with Musa alayhi salam. Oh, maybe we'll get an even better, higher position than we had before. That's the typical use of it. Versus in Musa alayhi salam's case, what is it? This is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I have no power except what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants. Who gets empowered as a result of it makes all the difference in terms of the permissibility, in terms of the intention of it, or the idea of good, a miracle versus a magic that's seen as a corruption.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anything else? If not, I'm going to continue through to the hopefully main part of today, which we have about 10 minutes more before we break for Maghrib. No, we're going to break from we're going to end before in just a few minutes, inshallah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then continues. لِنُرِيَكَ مِنْ آيَاتِنَا الْكُبْرَى, so that we may show you some of our greatest signs. These are just small ones. You'll see the much bigger ones. اذهب إلى فرعون إنه طغى. So go now to Fir'aun, because Fir'aun has transgressed all bounds. And now apparently Musa alayhi salam now responds with, and this is the part, this is the major lesson for today, is I want to capture what Musa alayhi salam says in Surah Taha and what Musa alayhi salam says in Surah Al-Qasas. First, I'm just going to recite it and read it ayah by ayah, and then I'll recite the other one and you tell me what you think. So in this narration, Musa alayhi salam says, قَالَ رَبِّ اشْرَحْ لِي صَدْرِي. My Lord, uplift my heart for me. وَيَسِّرْ لِي أَمْرِي, and make my task easy. وَاحْلُلْ عُقْدَةً مِّن لِسَانِي, and remove any impediments from my tongue. يَفْقَهُ قَوْلِي, so that people may understand my speech. وَاجْعَلْ لِي وَزِيرًا مِّنْ أَهْلِي, and grant me a helper from my family. هارون أخي, Harun, my brother. أشدد به أزري, and strengthen me through him. وأشركه في أمري, and let him share in my task. كي نسبحك كثيرا, so that we may glorify you so much. وَنَذْكُرُكَ كَثِيرًا, so and remember you so much. إِنَّكَ كُنْتَ بِنَا بَصِيرًا, and because you have always been observing everything we do. So this is the one. And now I want you to think about the other narration of what Musa alayhi salam now said. Okay? After the exact same conversation that came out of these are the two miracles that I'm going to give you, Musa alayhi salam responds, قَالَ رَبِّي إِنِّي قَتَلْتُ مِنْهُمْ نَفْسًا وَأَخَافُ أَنْ يَقْتُلُونَ. My Lord, I killed one of them, so I fear that they might try to kill me. وَأَخِي هَارُونُ هُوَ أَفْصَحُ مِنِّي لِسَانًا, and my brother Harun, he's much more eloquent, he's got a better tongue than I do. فَأَرْسِلْهُ مَعِيَ رِدْ أَنْ يُصَدِّقُنِي. So send him in my stead, and I'll be a supporter for what he has. to say inni akhafu an yukadhibun, because if you send me, I think they're just going to deny everything I said. So what's the difference?
He seems super, super nervous about, like, he second guesses himself and his ability. And it seems like he wasn't aware of how much he's capable of doing. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the other surah just highlights his talent pretty much.
Yeah. So in one of them, in Surah Al-Qasas, he's super nervous to the point where he's like, no, I killed someone. They might take retribution and they might kill me. And my brother, he's much better at this. He can speak better than me. So send him and I'll help him. Because if I only go alone, they might reject me. So that's Musa in one of them. And then the other one, Rabbi shrah li sadri. Oh Allah, make my task easy. Wa yassir li amri. Right? Open my heart, make my task easy. It's like this poetic thing that's being said. It rhymes all the way throughout. It's poetic. It's got so much eloquence to it. The way I personally see this is, Allahu Alam, Allah knows best. Surah Al-Qasas has a much more accurate account. So far, we've had so many different conversations that have taken place between Musa's mother and his sister, between Fir'aun's wife and Fir'aun, between that random guard who told Musa to leave. Like, we have a bunch of confirmed conversations in Surah Al-Qasas. So this is closer to how the characters actually said it and what they were going through, versus Surah Taha is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes the scenario. What I mean to say is this: sometimes when you're talking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you might say something like this, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most merciful. Allah might hear it like this. Are you guys getting the point here? You don't need to worry about, it's good to be eloquent with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like try your best, of course. But even if you say this, Allah's narration might be this. The other way I could say it is, look at everything that's being done here. There is insecurity. There is fear that I'm not good enough. There's fear that my reputation isn't good enough. I don't have the right motivation for it. My brother's better than me at it. There's all of this here. But in this one, it's transformed into what? The most powerful, empowering form of speaking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. First one is what? Rabbi shrah li sadri. Oh Allah, open for me my chest. Wa yassir li amri. Make my task easy. Wahlul uqdatam min lisani. Remove any impediment from my tongue. There's four things that are asked for here. Wa yafqahu qawli. The speech, make them understand it. In any form of communication, there are typically a couple of points of failure. It could be the way your motivation, your internal state. It could be the task itself is too difficult to describe. It could be in how you communicated it, or it could be in how they understood it. Asks for all of that to be done. And then even the idea of a helper from my family. وَاجْعَلْ لِي وَزِيرًا مِنْ أَهْلِي. From my family, give me a helper. هَارُونَ أَخِي. In this case, empower me with my family. The first one, we could even see this as him being, send my brother instead. He's much better at it than I am. And this one is, my brother could be a great aid for me. Ajdud bihi azri. Strengthen me through him. It's almost as if there's the light side of like Musa alayhi salam's protest, and Allah took that as the dua to grant Musa alayhi salam. Like, this is the dua that he was actually asking, even though this is what was said. I just find that to be like a super profound and interesting lesson. And let him share in my task. And also the last part is what gets me the most. كَيْ نُسَبِّحَ كَثِيرًا وَنَذْكُرَكَ كَثِيرًا. So that we might glorify you a lot and remember you so much. Did we see that at all here? No, not really. But maybe that's what we're supposed to say. Like, to be, for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to glorify Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala a lot. إِنَّكَ كُنْتَ بِنَا بَصِيرًا, because you've always been overseeing us. You don't really find that, but maybe that's in the heart of Musa alayhi salam, but he just couldn't find the words to say it. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala heard it. So To me, when you do the comparison, you start seeing, subhanAllah, how merciful Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, even with this, not just the speech that we said, but the speech that we didn't say. The dua of the heart, in my opinion, is what's found in Surah Al-Taha, not the one that was actually said by his tongue. So I said I would stop by about 6:25. It's 6:26 right now. Any final reflections or questions before we end for today?
I have something.
Sure.
It's kind of similar to what you just said, but I think like comparing the two texts, like I think it's beautiful because like one shows like kind of the insecurities that Musa alayhi salam was feeling, and that kind of shows like, I know like the Quran is all like light, but that kind of shows a certain amount of darkness that is within us, like how we just tend to like be so critical of ourselves. But then the way he talks to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is filled with so much nur because he's asking for all the help. And I think that just shows the difference between what we feel and how we should make dua, because we should be asking for the help instead of like letting the insecurity stop us from looking for like a hopeful future or something.
I would go as far as to say, agreeing with your point, I would go as far as to say that if you complain to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enough, this becomes what you start doing. I hope that makes sense, that this is how he expresses himself to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it could just be that when you do that enough times, you are become capable of such a beautiful kind of expression to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Does that make sense?
Yep, that makes sense.
I really appreciate you sharing that. Yeah, because sometimes we become really scared that my insecurities, am I good enough to talk to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And the answer is we definitely should, because that's going to be the way that you actually overcome whatever insecurity or whatever we kind of walk in with. I would go as far as to say your insecurity is like what you need to bring to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is doing it, Allah records it in the Quran. Bring that with you, and the response will be even because that's a much more authentic expression. Anyone else? Any final thoughts?
Yeah, just one quick thing. Oh, firstly, assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Secondly, the story, I know we compared a lot to Yusuf alayhi salam's story, but it's very reminiscent of Yaqub alayhi salam, and how when he would speak to the brothers, he had this, I wouldn't say air of confidence, but he was assuring them and he had a certain eloquence. And then when they would leave and it was just him and Allah, he was able to portray that sadness and his weaknesses and his vulnerabilities that he couldn't do with people around him. And I think comparing these two texts is kind of doing the same thing, where we can juxtapose the story between Musa alayhi salam and Yusuf alayhi salam once again.
Definitely. I 100% agree with you. That there's many parallels that are found between Yusuf alayhi salam's story and of course Musa alayhi salam's story. And one major one is, I hadn't even thought about that, is Yaqub alayhi salam in private versus public. And this is directly kind of there as well. But there's an eloquence that Musa alayhi salam has, but this time would be both in just talking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But I actually really like that contrast, that even in talking with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's this kind of diversity with how you can approach it. Anyone else?
I guess like the last thing I want to kind of include is that it's just so beautiful that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala kind of shows you how to make dua too at the end. Even the Musa alayhi salam, like the last two part where he says, so we can glorify you and remember you. Mm-hmm. That's like, that should be one of our not one of our, that's like the main goal of a human being. That's what it is. You're supposed to glorify Allah. And that's just the way how beautifully Allah teaches him. He doesn't at that point was just he was talking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He could have called Musa alayhi salam out like, hey, make dua like this, or he didn't specifically say it, but within the Quran you can find you can see how nicely and kindly Allah dealt with his servants. And that just goes to show, if this is how Allah teaches you Islam, and this is how nicely your Lord teaches you Islam, how can you come to someone and give dawah in a most brutal way, or not even brutal way, in such a harsh manner?
Yeah. we're going to go over this a lot more. So we're going to continue this conversation the next week and maybe even the week after that. Next week, we're starting at 6:10 or 6:15, let's say 6:15, so we can pray Maghrib beforehand. So we don't have to end early, inshallah. But next week, we're going to get into when Allah SWT tells him to go to Fir'aun, the killer of babies, and says, go to him and speak to him with kind words so that maybe his heart could be affected. If the killer of babies can be given light words so that his heart might wake up, we're not allowed to be rude to people. Like that doesn't work. So that's going to be like a major example, inshallah, of where we come to. But even in this, how Allah SWT speaks to Musa alayhi salam, putting up with what he's been through, doing all of this, is supposed to be effective ideas that we take on. Like when we're reminding about Allah SWT, what type of kindness and kind of openness should we have, and what should we tolerate with people. So inshallah, we'll continue with that the next time we're together. May Allah SWT make us amongst those that bring all of our insecurities to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can teach us how to eloquently speak about them to ourselves and to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, while how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes the messes of our hearts and turns them into beautiful callings that make us what? Closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, allow us to glorify Allah more, allow us to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala more, innaka kunta bina basira, so that we're able to one day recognize and say that it was truly Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who's been watching over us the entire time. There's a progression even in his needs being met throughout this dua. So we'll talk about it a little bit more next week, and we'll get into the actual mission that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends Musa alayhi salam on towards the end of this conversation. We ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to be those that speak to Allah and listen to the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as they're presented around us. Ameen Rabbil Alameen. Jazakallah khairan. Let's conclude with Maghrib. Jazakallah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.